morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Node Nerds. We have some wonderful new faces with us today, new members of our education team, Doc Wigington and Tucker Nace. So we would first like to introduce you to them. Go ahead, Doc. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Angela. My name's Doc Wigington. I live in Flanders, New Jersey, just outside of New York City. And I'm a new member of the education team this year. And I'm having an awful lot of fun meeting all of you on the road and now meeting some of you virtually. It's great.
Good to have you.
Hi, guys. Tucker Nace. I am from Central Pennsylvania, and I am a new member of the computerized education team. And just like Doc, having a blast, out on the road, seeing everyone and seeing everyone here.
That's great. It's so nice to have you guys with us. I'm sure we are all appreciative of more views and ideas and all that stuff that we can share with you. So today's episode, we're going to talk about everything related to tags and collections and how we manage our patterns. So exciting. So lots of questions on the road about, how do you organize your patterns? How do you quickly find things? How do you, do you bother taking the time to go in and clean up tags that might already be in there? So let's start a little bit with how we do our tag management. Vita, how do you do your tags?
Honestly, I don't play with them a whole lot.
That's
I
fair.
figure the ones that went before me know best. I do occasionally, when I bring in big groups of patterns, if they're for a specific project, then I will go in and I will put them in a collection. Or if I find that I'm looking for something and I can't find it using a certain keyword, then I will add a keyword that makes sense to me to the tags in a particular pattern so that I don't continuously have trouble finding it.
Right.
I have to ask this because when I tag, I usually tag by season too. So I don't know if any of you do that, but I'll put in a holiday tag on, say, my more Christmas quilts, or I'll put fall ones or even some spring ones. Does anybody else tend to do that with theirs?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
do.
do that, especially when it's not like an obvious Christmas one, but works really well for Christmas. I've got some that kind of look like wind and snow, but aren't snowflakes, And so sometimes I'll tag them that way. I often tag mine with my customers' names too. Like if Shirley bought, she wanted a very specific pattern that I might not need. I'm thinking of one I did for a sports team. Then I can always find, I'm not going to remember the team, but I remember Shirley. So that's an easy way for me to go back and find stuff. And you can tag as much as you want. So I say leave the ones that are there. I don't clean mine up. I just leave them as they are so I can get as much information when I need it.
Well, and that's, I guess, what it is in a nutshell, that there's no specific formula really as to how to tag. It's basically how you as an individual search for your patterns. That's what it comes down to. I find myself being horrible if I buy patterns that, are from a club and you get a ginormous selection of patterns. And yes, I do add them as a collection for that specific club in the month. But the problem is because they're not usually patterns that go together. It's a smorgasbord of different patterns. I should really, before I import them, retag them. But, last winter and the winter before, I was gonna go through all my patterns and retag them. Now another winter has gone by and I still haven't done that. So because it's a problem, because the more patterns we collect on our quilting journey, the harder it is to find them. So because I'm a bit lacking on my efforts, the way I usually search for them is not in Creative Studio, but I go onto the pattern cloud where I can see my patterns and they're bigger on my big screen. But is that the most efficient way? No. So remember to tag your patterns as you import them.
Well, and I think it too, it's a habit thing, right? So if you get in the habit of doing it right away, then once you have all the excess of patterns, then it's easier to find. But in the beginning, when you don't have very many, it doesn't seem like it's a big deal. But if you get yourself in that habit, I think it's helpful. But
I think for our new users, it's important not to change the names of like the geometric patterns or the template patterns. I know that I made that mistake when I was a beginner, and then I couldn't go back and find the template that I wanted or the geometric shape that I wanted. And so keeping those patterns that are geometric circle that we use all the time or square, leaving them alone so we can find them. You can tag them how you want, but don't change the file name because they're that way for a reason.
Right.
What
How
about you, Tucker?
Sorry.
I was just gonna say. And then just like Doc said, sometimes there are patterns that look very geometrical to you, but have nothing geometrical about them in the tags. So that's what I like to do when I get patterns. I go into the tags and I add tags and keywords that I know I will search for. So if something's geometric, I'll put that tag in there. That way, when I search for it, it'll come up. Just makes things go a lot smoother. Also too, as I've had my machine now for a couple of years and I, work with the patterns that came with the machine, even as I'm working with patterns, I might see something a little different. So I go into my tags even long after I've had that pattern and change, what tags are in there.
Yeah, I like to, I don't know if any of you do this, but particularly with my edge to edge patterns, I have a range of pricing for my customers from like 2 cents to like 3 cents or 3.5 cents. And once I stitch that out, that very first time, and I know how long it's going to take to stitch, I tag it with the price so that it's easy when a customer comes in and says, I don't like a lot of dense quilting. I can look up all my 2 centers and bring that up for them, and then they can just see the less dense ones. So tagging can be it can be really advantageous for you that way if you decide on something like that specific that will be quick for you to find your things.
And like Ava said, sometimes they don't belong to a group. So because I do a lot of Judy Niemeyer quilts, I am buying big groups of patterns that are for a specific quilt. And that's when I like that collection option, because then I can put them all into a group, a collection for the vintage rose quilt. Because once you bring them in, they don't come in the shape of the quilt. They come in all individually, and then you're like, what was that for? What even is that pattern? What would I use it for? Because you forget when you've got 10,000 patterns in there, it makes it even harder to begin to parse them out. So the collection option is also really nice.
Yeah. So I'm hearing none of you really go back and take out any of the tags that are already there. I don't do that either. I figure, it doesn't hurt to have it in there, but I'll put in something that speaks to me more if the other ones don't really, fit my quick way of searching.
Well, and there are certain designers that have an unusual way of naming their patterns, as in, they start out with the numbers, a sequence of numbers, and then a line, the underscore, and then maybe some type of name. So just recently on the tour, one of the students said, yeah, that doesn't work for her because that's not a way she would ever search for patterns. So in that particular case, she would go and literally rename the pattern in order for her to more easily find it.
Probably takes out the number part, Ava, and the stuff that doesn't mean
Yep.
anything to her. It means something to the designer, obviously,
Right.
but doesn't mean anything to her when she's
I'm
looking for it.
guessing that that's how they keep track how many patterns they have. I'm sure they, assign for each new design that they create a number. So to them, it makes sense, but as a search feature, not so much.
Right, right.
How about when you alter patterns? If you combine patterns or if you alter them in some way, how do you like to tag them or rename them or?
Well,
I
what
put
I was,
my
go ahead, Doc.
after the I'm sorry, I put my initials after, so I know that anything that has my initials after, that's something that's mine. And I try not to ever erase the original pattern or modify the original one, but save it separately. That way I have, Ava's pattern and my pattern, right? And so I can, because mine is going to work for this project, but maybe not for the next one. And so I like to keep them that way tagged.
Sometimes too, and what I was going to say along with that is that if I make any type of my own original pattern from start to finish, I will put my name as a tag because I think back, oh, I know I made this one pattern at one point. What was it? What was it? Right. And then I can just search my name and find it that way. So even that goes along with what you guys are talking about. If you edit or adjust some of these other patterns, you could put your name on it too, knowing that you had at one point changed things.
So I would add REV for revised, as in the name. But if I create my own patterns along what Doc was saying, I put my initials first. And if I make a change to a pattern, it goes on the end. But yeah, working in conjunction with using the collections is definitely the best way, I think, to go because yeah, there's a bunch of collections too, but I find it's easier to manage those compared to the thousands of patterns that we accumulate.
We have some I think we all each have some general rules of thumb, right? When we're tagging. Like for me, one of them is I never put a plural on anything. So if it's bird, if it has birds in it, I just say bird. And that's just so that I can find it in case I put a plural one time and it doesn't come up. What are some of your rules of thumb that you follow for yourself?
I don't know, that's tricky because I know that sometimes searching for things can be a little finicky. Like if you don't capitalize the first letter or so you capitalize it when you tag it, but then you don't capitalize it when you're searching for it, sometimes that doesn't always come up. So I see what you're saying with having some kind of system, but I haven't gotten there yet. I just haven't.
I try to use generic words like bird, not eagle, or baby animal instead of like rabbit or whatever it is. I like to have those detailed ones too, but sometimes when we're creating, we want to find all the baby animals for the baby quilt, right? We don't just want the rabbit. And so if I tag it with a generic, the sort of most kindergarten word I can find, then the chances are that's the one I'm going to think of first, and that's the one that I'll search. So that's sort of my rule of thumb, and lowercase all the time. It just sort of keeps things clean, unless I'm tagging my initials and then I capitalize them. Sort of says, "This is yours." Makes it a little bit easier to see visually on the screen.
Yeah, going back to what Kayla was saying, she said she wasn't quite there yet. And, that is something that I agree, because um, for me, there's still processes I'm figuring out, and I realize as I become, well, somewhat smarter, that maybe something else will be more beneficial in the long run. So that's okay. I mean, I've been doing this for different length of time, and the key is to figure out what works best for you so you can be most efficient in your searches. But one thing I do want to add too, when we're talking about renaming and combining patterns, one of the things to consider always for everyone out there and for us is that we need to always be aware of the copyright, when we're making changes to patterns, that we still acknowledge, as it says, when you're on Creative Studio, the parent pattern, that we keep all that in mind, because that's super important.
Absolutely.
Well, when you make changes, even if you make a few changes and then you're saving the pattern again, it leaves all that information in there. That's why, like you said, Ava, that you use REV, I use ALT, all caps, altered. But it keeps all the other information in there. And so that's good. So we don't want to take any of that information out, because that will help to remind us that somebody else actually created the original pattern that we then altered to use for something else or combined with another pattern.
Right.
I recently did a collection of Christmas ornaments, and I forgot that I started with somebody else's Christmas ball, and it was just a simple Christmas ball that I used. And when I went to save the whole collection, of course, it had this parent information that I couldn't get rid of, so I had to go in and come up with a new Christmas ball for my thing. So having that information is handy when not that anybody's going to do it on purpose, of course, but sometimes you get to the end and you forgot where that original idea came from 6 months ago when you first started designing this set of designs. So I really appreciate that. It sort of helps to keep you honest and helps you to do the right thing.
Tucker, do you use, I use all the time, my favorite star. Do you star any of your favorites so they show up first in the list at all, or?
Yep, I have a couple patterns. I have a couple of my really dense ones that I like to put on my own quilts. And then I have a couple of my, easy ones that I like to, throw on a quilt just to get it done. That little star does come in handy, because half the time those really dense ones have a long name attached to them. So that little star does come quite in handy.
Yeah. How about you guys? Do the rest of you star your favorites, or Kayla, are you not there yet?
I guess not. I mean, I'm still in the habit of putting mine in order from newest. So my newest patterns come to the top, and that seems to be enough for me because I can just scroll through and find it quick. Usually I take my icons from the medium size to really small. So then I can have tons of them when I'm looking and I expand it. So I can just, that's the one I want. So typically I don't star at this point, but I'm sure I will. I'll get there.
Well, and I use the favorites, the star only if I am designing a pattern, and I come back to it here and there, or I want to do a variation of the same pattern. And, coming back, like Doc said, 6 months later, well, hopefully not that long, but sometime later, then it's easily identifiable because I really don't use the favorites for anything else. And of course, if I design them, they are going to be my favorites. So,
Yeah. I mean, I asked the question, Ava, but honestly, I have one pattern that's starred, and you know what it is? It's the geometric square, and that's just because I like to put it over so that I don't have to draw out a boundary every time. I just change it to fit my block size. So yeah, that's the only one that's in my favorites right now, but what else? What else? Collections. We talked about collections too. So there you can create them to put some patterns in, so that it's easy to find. Like if you have a specific quilt. Vita, do you do this for some of the, because you do often the same quilt a couple times with the Judy Niemeyer stuff, but do you have collections that work well for that? Or
So I name the collections I sort them by the name of the quilt. I also will save the projects. So, because sometimes, for example, one particular piece, pattern piece, was designed way bigger than what the actual quilts came out as, because Judy like pre-releases stuff to pattern designers. So they start designing off of what maybe is not the finished quilt. And so then there have to be all these adjustments that are made when you actually go to make them fit. So sometimes I'll save them, and on my first quilt tab, I'll put any adjusted patterns that I don't want to save into my database, and I go back to that. So then when I load another one just like it, I'll open up that project and pull from those patterns as well, until I figure out, am I going to use that size, or do I need to save that in my database? Because I don't want 3 or 4 of the same thing all altered. Does it make sense? It was just because.
For one particular thing.
Yeah. Yeah. But I find that
So-
that works really well.
Let me ask this. Do you guys do this right at your computer with your Stitcher, or do you do this in standalone?
Stitcher.
Oh, I do it on standalone mostly.
Do I?
I mean,
Both.
unless it's something that like I know right away when I'm at my Stitcher that I need to add this tag, then I'll add that. But any of my pattern management, I kind of sit on a comfy couch and have a look at it.
So I sit at my Stitcher.
Okay.
I have a stool height office chair at my Stitcher. And then I have a huge TV in my studio. So I don't mind sitting there and right there on the Stitcher making changes and sorting things, and while watching a TV show or whatever in my studio. I feel like I end up being more focused on what I'm doing than if I'm in the house and people are available to distract me. If I'm out there, they're like, leave her alone, she's busy.
No, but that is the interesting part, really, for this whole conversation that we've had, that, everybody has a different way of doing things with the same goal in mind. So I always find that fascinating. It's evident how differently our brains work, and it comes back to, I think everybody has different organizational skills and preferences. So, but that's the beauty of it, we can customize the way we manage our patterns and everything, based on our specific needs. So I think it's fun.
That's a reminder, Ava. How many of you actually print out catalogs of your patterns?
Not
Okay.
me.
I
All
do.
right.
I
Yeah.
sort of do. I have a charity one that's like got 4 fast patterns that I've copied a few times, but not usually. No.
Yeah.
I email them more often than I print them.
I've been
Yeah,
very fortunate that most people who want me to do edge to edge stuff, or actually any quilt, they're like, do whatever you think. They're not that involved in the process. And the few clients that I have that are like, I'm thinking some sort of birds or flowers, then I just pull it up they're in my studio, they're not in my house. And so I just pull it right up on the screen, and I mock up the measurements for them so that they can really see, which is nice because you can, as we teach on the tour, you can mock up the quilt for them in the edge to edge function on the screen, and they can actually see what it's going to look like and how big it's going to stitch out and everything. And then you can start clicking on changing them and showing the different options. So I just do it
that's a lot more beneficial to them, rather than, in my opinion, a piece of paper. It's different if people mail you the quilts. I've sent patterns, via email or text, but yeah, I still won't print them out. I'll just screenshot them and send them.
Yeah.
So this
well,
is where
I will say I will say this is a segue into our next episode. So if you're interested about more of this,
Yeah.
we can talk about it in the next episode.
Yeah.
But I do print mine because I meet my clients somewhere else. But again, we can talk about that in a little bit here because I don't want to spoil the next episode.
Right. And Angela's tag of putting the price also makes it very helpful. If you're not going to print them out, then you can say, oh, if they say I only want a 1.5 cent or a 2 cent or whatever, you can sort them. And that way they don't even see the patterns they're not willing to pay for.
The other thing that does too, Ava, it also doesn't show them any of the patterns that I might not be wanting to quilt.
Yeah.
You know, that's a conversation for another day
Yeah.
because really, because me personally, and I'm probably the only one on that screen, I select the patterns based on what I think goes with the quilt. I don't care if it takes an hour to stitch out a row because I'm not going to stand there. That's why I have a Statler. I do my other work right here at the computer, and when I hear the ding, I go over there and advance. So, you know, but that's me personally. I have the same charge for all my edge to edge because to me personally, you know, it doesn't matter. So I don't want to be limited or want them to be limited with the choices that I give them. I'm sure y'all's choices are fabulous, you know, based on their budget, but I never did want to do that. What I do, however, I ask them in advance to send me a picture of their quilt so I don't have to read through all my edge to edges. So I have a general idea and can add, you know, 5 or 6 patterns to start on the screen before they get there. So again, we all do things differently.
But we'll talk about that in the next episode.
We're honing in on Kayla's subject, can you tell? So
Yeah, right.
we should wrap up any other pattern management items we want to share with our viewers today. We talked about tags and catalogs and how we all have different ways, which is your way is the absolute right way. Whether you go all lowercase, all uppercase, don't put S's on things, whether you do collections, the sky is the limit. So it's however you're going to be able to find your things again is probably the best advice we could give you, and come up with your own system. It's like any filing system. I'm sure if we opened up any of our file managers on all of our computers, every single one of us would have a different management system. So it's the same thing in CS. You guys just pick what works for you. So
Very
yeah.
well put.
Well, thank you for joining us. We hope you got a little bit of something out of our pattern management. If you want to know anything more specific about it, of course, we're always looking for suggestions for next episodes. So please put that in the comments and we would be happy to elaborate. So thank you everybody for being here. Thanks, Doc, Ava, Kayla, Vita, Tucker.
Happy quilting.
I'll see you next
Happy
time.
quilting.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.